For fans of anime such as myself, it is kind of embarrassing and annoying when you get your favorite show or genre compared to a kid's show or a Disney movie. For example, one day at the bar, me and my father were sitting there drinking and chilling, and he looks up and sees Monster Incorporated on the TV. And he proceeds to go, "Oh look, Dakota, anime." Naturally, I had to fight off the urge to go on a 20-minute rant about how it wasn't anime, which probably would have made my situation and the way I look as an anime-loving son a lot worse. But it made me realize how much the average person that isn't exposed to any of this weeb stuff doesn't see the difference or think twice about comparing something like Disney or Toy Story or Pixar to something like Jujutsu Kaisen or any other anime. Obviously, to fans, there's a huge difference, like worlds apart. But many of us focus on the differences way too much. And it turns out there's actually a lot we can learn about anime when we compare it to something like Pixar when it comes to storytelling and animation. Pixar, you know, the guys behind The Incredibles, Inside Out, all 500 Toy Stories we have now, and massive hits like The Good Dinosaur. Well, they actually have a list of 22 rules that must be followed or is heavily encouraged to follow when it comes to creating an animation story. And these rules are the guidelines for just about every single film. It's why one of their worst performing movies, Turning Red, is still universally loved. That being said, I want to take these rules and the golden formula that Pixar has into their movies that they work with and just see how it lines up with anime that we love and how much these two genres overlap. Is anime really that different from shows that we make in the West, or is there a lot of overlap and similarities that we just don't want to admit to? So get ready, because we're about to ask the big heavy questions that big animation is trying to hide from us. Just how do Mike Wazowski and Tanjiro keep viewers engaged? Where do we draw the line when it comes to unbelievable characters like Remy the Rat and Denji the Dog? Why did I fall in love with Makima and that blue car with the tramp stamp? Rule number 1, you admire a character for trying more than for succeeding. When watching movies, we don't really need to see the characters win or triumph. If you think about it, the big victories don't come until the end of the movie. But if we don't care about them the entire time up till that point, then it's already way too late to be saving things. What we do care about and what we latch onto is the effort. Seeing somebody really try will naturally lead the audience to building up a connection with them and becoming invested themselves. For example, when we look at movies like Finding Nemo, it can be really easy to not like or appreciate Marlin at the start of the film. He's the clownfish. He's overprotective, he's kind of a jerk, and because he smothers his son with so much love and protection, Nemo, that's the other clownfish, becomes desperate to separate himself and become his own person, or fish. And sure, Marlin is putting in the effort to be a good father, but he's doing it in a way that comes natural to him. He's allowing himself to give into feelings of anxiety, which he thinks makes him a good dad, right? But we don't connect with that because he comes off as insufferable, a clown, if you will. However, then Nemo goes missing. And then we see Marlin basically go to the ends of the earth, quite literally, to save and reunite his son. And I don't know how fast fish swim, but that's a lot of time and distance, okay? We're talking what, like 4 miles an hour for a clownfish? But this is him putting in real effort. And he has to go against natural instincts as a warrior, putting himself in the most dangerous and difficult situations. He has to try and he has to grow, and this is why we end up loving him. And it's kind of dark to think about, but if Marlin did all of this and still failed to save Nemo, we would still love him as a character. We'd share in the tragedy and the sadness right along with him, and effort is magic. It allows us to empathize with characters' victories and defeats in a really powerful way. And this is something going to anime that shonen loves to play with. Let's take a look at Naruto. Naruto is an orphan who grew up so lonely that he dreams of becoming the leader of the entire village. That way everybody would accept him. Obviously, we are rooting for him all the way, but we actually don't care if he actually becomes Hokage or not. Obviously, he does, but along the way and up till that point, what we care about is the effort that Naruto is putting in. All the victories that he tries to win and overcome. It's why small individual moments where he actually proves his worth are so impactful. It leads to scenes where characters who hated, feared, or mistreated him in the past finally understand and respect him. But because we watched him struggle to get here, these moments feel earned and are appreciated. Ironically, every time we watch him struggle to pop a balloon or split a waterfall with his chakra or fight with his last bit of energy to save his friends, we are watching as his dream slowly starts to not matter. Sure, he still wants to be Hokage, and this is important on some level, but by the end of the story, it is really just a title. What he really been searching for was approval, and in trying so hard for so long, he has already made himself into somebody worthy of respect from those around him. Put it simply, it's a journey, not the destination, that wins us over. Rule number 2, keep in mind what is interesting to you as an audience. It's not fun to do as a writer, they can be very different. It can be super fun and easy to write exciting stories and climactic events. This rule reminds us that sometimes what the viewer will become invested in is sometimes more important than what the author wants to make. Spy Family's mangaka Tatsuya Endo is a great example of this, and I know you've heard the story a million times, but I'll make it quick. Endo was actually behind several series before Spy Family, and you might be surprised to hear this, but his biggest success so far, our fan favorites, is far from his favorite. He started as a manga's assistant, working on Blue Exorcist, Fire Punch, and eventually began working on many of his own series with one-shots. Rengoku no Ash, a story that follows Ash the Witch, Ishi no Usabeni, Tetsuya Hoshi, and a one-shot about Medusa's daughter. There's even a 2-volume series about a shy student becoming an assassin at night. These are all series that he enjoyed working on and creating, but they never really found much success. In a creative slump, he made Spy Family, something far different from the dark stories of witches and assassins, but still had some sort of Esper powers and assassins in it. The direction instead going towards more comical. He even took one of the badass witch girls from his previous anime and made it into a small little Anya. Endo had a whole genre and stories and characters that he loved to work with. However, it was clear that his audience just wasn't interested in that sort of story. And sure, it's important to create what you like, what your passion is, to put it on paper and don't quote unquote sell out. But sometimes you gotta say, fine, I'll write this crap everybody loves and then we get Spy Family. At some point, making something for your audience needs to be more important than just making something for yourself. Rule number 3. Trying for a theme is important, but you won't see what the story is actually about till you're at the end of it. Now, rewrite. To fully understand the actual themes and the meanings of stories, you need to be able to look at it in its entirety. Sure, subsections might have their own ideas behind them, but as a whole, you need to be able to be flexible with the story it becomes. With that in mind, a writer needs to be willing to go back and rewrite his story so that it may fit more with the theme that it was grown into along the way, and that way things can be a little bit more cohesive. Many Pixar films are completely different from what they were written originally and what had to be rewritten. Toy Story was a great example of this, being originally called Toy 10, where the toys became alive under the right circumstances, and instead of Woody and Buzz, you're followed Tinny and the old ventriloquist dummy. Now, they changed the Tin Man into Lunar Larry, and then Tempest, and then ultimately Buzz Lightyear, Tim Allen. Meanwhile, the old dummy was originally made to look like Woody. The core idea of the toys coming alive stuck around. However, the story's theme developed into something completely unexpected. An old toy becoming worried that he might be replaced, and especially with something new and shiny, tin? Something which really tied in with how Andy was growing up and changing himself. The entire movie and story needed to be rewritten to explore these new themes and these new ideas fluently. With that said, it's obviously easier to do that when it comes to an individual's film or story rather than a weekly series, but we can explore a series which began as one-shots and eventually needed to be reimagined into becoming its full series. For example, My Hero Academia, originally focused around a quirkless salaryman Deku, this middle-aged loser who lived in the wonderful world of heroes. The original theme revolved around him being an ordinary going into extraordinary, but as the story flushed out and this one-shot was developed, you start to see how things began to shift. Subtly, we are exploring what it meant to be extraordinary and how the different superpowers that people developed would affect how they experience the world around them. To be more in line with this theme, Deku was reimagined into what we see him as today, a quirkless student who gets to fulfill his dream of becoming a hero but quickly becomes face to face with the flaws of the hero society that he once put on a pedestal. It wasn't until this one shot was fleshed out and completed where Horikoshi could go back and understand what he really wanted from both Deku's character and the story of My Hero as a whole. And being able to make those changes allowed MHA to become one of the most successful manga and anime of all time. Rule number 4. Once upon there was blank, every day blank, one day blank, because of that blank. But because of that blank, until finally, blank. Not much of a rule, but a guideline, but Pixar creates the story spine, and this actually goes back to The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, who says that every single main protagonist is the same character. From Sully from Monsters Inc. to Monkey D. Luffy to Luke Skywalker, and even going all the way back to ancient stories like King Arthur. The Hero's Journey explains that most protagonists go through the same broad stages of storytelling. Cut down to its most simple version, you have departure, initiation, and the return. Or in Pixar's case, once upon a time blank, every day blank, until blank. For example, if you look at the movie Monsters Inc., we can take that once upon a time there was a world of monsters. Every day, they scared children and would make scream energy. Until one day, Sully brought a human girl back to the monsters world. And this can be used to set the stage of any outline of any major story. For example, Attack on Titan. Once upon a time, a massive creature called Titans walked the earth. Every day, humanity hid behind walls to stay safe until one day Titans broke through their walls. And from there, we can kind of plug and play what is going on with the steps of the hero's journey. The call to adventure is Eren vowing to kill all Titans. He meets his mentor Levi. Crossing the thresholds is him becoming a Survey Corps member. Essentially, every stage of the majority of the protagonist's journey can be mapped out on this chart. And once things return to some sort of balance, there's going to be inevitably a new call to adventure, especially if the series is going to continue. The nice part about movies is they normally have to circle through this process only once, whereas a long-running series might need to run through this several times, possibly even once an arc. Of course, when that is the case, some steps will be skipped, and you're not going to find a new mentor every single time. But you will need to learn something to grow as a character. Rule number 5, simplify, focus, combine characters, hop over detours. You'll feel like you're losing valuable stuff, but it sets you free. Knowing and realizing that some of your characters, ideas, and elements that you were excited to include in your story that should be taken out is brutal. However, by simplifying and removing the clutter, you can allow what remains to shine so much brighter. For example, we look at Inside Out. I mean, just think about how many emotions we have. Include all of them, it can be overwhelming and distracting. Look at how many more ideas that they're coming out with right now with Inside Out. There's not only 2 movies, but there's a numerous amount of shorts that they want to explore further ideas for. Stuff that wouldn't have been able to fit into the original movie. So instead, focusing on just the first movie, you had Pixar simplifying what we had. Joy, sadness, fear, disgust, and anger. Not only that, but a majority of the movie was simplified even further when we just follow along with joy and sadness. Not only does it make for these 2 characters to really stand out, but it makes the few moments that we have with these characters actually carry weight. You can only watch anger erupt so many times before it just becomes annoying. By limiting the screen time, it generally makes the characters better as a result. And this category is actually a place where anime tends to struggle quite a bit. Specifically, this is a problem when filler becomes involved. That being said, since most anime has switched to seasonal releases rather than weekly releases like we did back in the good old days, this problem has become less and less dealt with, which luckily means that you don't have to get things like Naruto having something like 40% of filler and 700 episodes. We don't talk about Boruto. On top of that, anime is famous for being artificially extending to meet needs and the desires of the companies and fans. Dragon Ball is the biggest example of this. This series involved a boy named Goku and his mysterious strength and abilities as he travels the world in search of the Dragon Balls. Okay, the original series has come to an end, but Even though the nice little bow was tied on top with Goku defeating Piccolo, then we got Dragon Ball Z, which came along with a time skip, Saiyans, aliens, androids, heart disease, time travel, a bubblegum dude with genie pants, and then all of Super years later. By Toriyama allowing the series to continue to be extended by Shonen Jump, the series continued to get crazier and crazier until it didn't resemble what it started out as all. Depending on who you ask as a fan, that could be for better or worse, but I think this is a perfect example of allowing a story to be inflated can change the core idea it was. Rule 6. What is your character good at, comfortable with? Throw the polar opposite at them, challenge them. How do they deal? Challenging your characters is nothing new in storytelling, and it helps characters grow with their audience like we talked about in rule number 1. Adversity breeds growth, and growth makes characters great. Pixar's Elementals is a great demonstration of challenging one character's comfortability can lead to growth and conflict and a really compelling story. Basically, the whole world of Elemental is essentially broken down into 4 different communities. You have the fires, the waters, the airs, and the lands. Now, there is some overlap, but as a whole, people tend to stick with who they're comfortable with their family, especially when it comes to fire and water. It is kind of hard to oversee differences in each other when if you trip on me, I might literally die. However, this movie forces Ember and Wade, our 2 main characters, in a situation where they have to work together. And as a result, they learn a lot about each other and the misconceptions that they have been known about each other. Not only that, but Ember's family is challenged to be more open-minded when it comes to the choices that she makes in her life and accepting her friends. And of course, anime is no stranger to this idea. One of the best anime movies out there based off of a show that's a continuation is The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya. The show The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya is about Haruhi, and by Haruhi I mean Kyon, as he's living his life revolving around Haruhi. The phrase, "it's your world, I'm just living in it," is quite literal when it comes to Haruhi, because she is the god of that world, she just doesn't know it. If she becomes bored, her subconscious will make things just magically appear like, oh, I wish there was a giant monster to come take out the school today. That would happen. So it's up to Kyon and the other members of this club she formed for fun, the SOS Brigade, to keep her entertained without her knowing in this high school life. And that way she doesn't destroy the whole entire effing world. Now, prior to meeting Haruhi, Kyon lived a very boring life. But suddenly being thrusted into the responsibilities of having to keep this selfish bitch in check, The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya is a film where Kyon suddenly wakes up in a world where nobody remembers Haruhi and nobody remembers anything that they've done together that past year except for him. The world hasn't changed. It's the same world, just nobody knows who Haruhi is, and Kyon doesn't know where she is. The SOS Brigade members are still a part of that school. You have the future time traveler girl who's actually still from the future. You have a Esper and a robot who are still there, but they have no connection to Haruhi anymore, and by extension, Kyon. This leaves Kyon anxious and desperate to try and fix things and get things back to normal because he misses, whether he likes to admit it or not, the high school antics and fun that Haruhi brought around with him. It's called the melancholy life for a reason. He was bored with it, and then unbeknownst to him, God put herself in front of him and started entertaining him, whether he likes to admit it or not. So those whole days of saying that, oh, I just would rather live without her and I don't want to deal with this, was given to him, and he quite literally cannot handle it. Ultimately, he does fix things and they go back to normal in his normal life, or what is technically normal. However, as he now realizes that he loves such things that he used to consider a burden, his entire perspective on life has changed, and it's a perfect example of taking a character who was frustrated but comfortable with their lives, taking that consistency away and that safety net to show them exactly what is important to them. And this is true for both of these characters, from Elemental or Haruhi Suzumiya. Rule 7. Come up with your ending before you figure out your middles. Seriously, endings are hard. Get yours working up front. Pixar does this in just about every single movie. They know Nemo is going to be found. They know that Marlin needs to grow up and stop being an overprotective douche. They know that Lightning McQueen, ka-chow, will give up his piston cup and learn what it means to be empathetic. And you know this fucking rat is going to make the shit out of some ratatouille. Having an ending in mind allows you to go forward with your story and make it as cohesive as possible. And while you need to be allowed some flexibility with how endings will turn out, knowing that they might change, knowing where you're going ensures that nothing falls apart last minute along the way. There are definitely series in anime and manga that are out there that do this exact same thing. For example, Wonder Egg Priority is a perfect example of that not working out. There is no clear direction or ending for this show. For the first time in this list, we have something that is doing the exact opposite of what this guideline is and what it probably should have done in the first place. Wonder Egg Priority came out with a wonderful first episode. It had a lot of hype behind it and everybody loved it. Setting up an amazing foundation, they completely crash landed on the last episode, or should I say the quote-unquote last movie. They made it unbearable to watch all the way through on a rewatch. The ending movie was supposed to be this perfect little bow around everything to wrap everything up. But instead, we got half of it being a recap and the other half just not doing anything. And that is why it is so important that you have an ending in mind. Naruto will become Hokage. Luffy will find the One Piece. Tanjiro is probably going to save his sister. By knowing the destination, you can ask yourself, how do we get there? Rather than ask what comes next, and then you get diluted and spiral out of control in a different direction that you don't know where you're going. And that makes all the difference. One series that I see having a clear ending is Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer. The manga, not the anime. A manga about where Earth is going to be destroyed and they gotta stop the giant hammer coming down called the Biscuit Hammer. The series stars Samidare and Yuhi. And there's this like dopey lizard named Noid, he's really cool. Yuhi wakes up one day to a lizard telling him that he's going to be involved with this big fight to stop the Biscuit Hammer. He, of course, is like, what the fuck's a Biscuit Hammer? To which Noi explains it's a giant hammer in space that you can't see that's going to destroy the world. Now you can see it. Then they're joined by Samidare, who says that she is not going to save the world. She's going to stop the hammer from destroying the world so that she can destroy the world after. She is declaring to herself that she's going to be the one to destroy it. So at this point, the ending is established. This is what we're going to go towards, is Samidare going to destroy this thing so she can destroy the world herself. You are traveling with these characters and you see through the battles, despite what she says, there's no way Samidare really wants to destroy the world. But getting to this point where everyone's going to call her out on her bullshit is a part of the story, and that's the ending we're moving towards. This series does a great job of distracting you from the first chapter where she proclaims that she's going to destroy the world, and instead focuses on the big threat overleaning their heads quite literally and protecting the world. Right before leading up to the final events where you go, oh wait a minute, didn't she say that she wanted to we gotta address that, huh? Rule 8. Finish your story, let go, even if it's not perfect. An ideal world, you have both, but move on. Do better next time. This rule essentially is a reminder not to hyper-focus on being perfect. A completed project is way better than being stuck in development for years on end. There's never going to be that perfect YouTube video that you're going to perfectly make and it's going to make you happy when you release it. It's just going to have to be put out. Your idea might be the greatest story ever told, but if you nitpick everything down the line, it may never even be seen. Then what's the point? Now, when it comes time to move on, sometimes good enough is good enough. But good enough has to be okay. If there are elements you are unhappy with, at least you know better for next time. We may never get to see many of the scrapped ideas that manga artists have that they just weren't happy with. They never wanted to actually put it out. We may never see a picture perfect Pixar movie because ideas were turned down or denied because they just took too long or they're not happy with the idea. But because there are series out there that weren't obsessed over, the writers were able to look forward and make the next best thing after they do that, or refine it after they get into it. One creator that comes to mind for me that never stops is Rumiko Takahashi. Now, some of you may have heard a bunch of different series from her. Ram the Half, Inuyasha, but others that people haven't heard of that she put out and worked on. If she were to hyper-focus on those, then we never would have gotten shows like Inuyasha or Ram the Half. If for the first 3 decades she never released Urusei Yatsura because the chapters just weren't in her liking, or never would have released Bye Bye Road, then she never would have moved on to make the next best thing. Finishing a story and moving on may not lead to ideal situations that you want to be in. But continuing forward allows you to Move on with your creations and discover new things that you love and want to create. More things for fans to fall in love with. Obviously, it's good to know when you've struck gold like Berserk or One Piece or JoJo's. These series have been going on for decades, and that's great. But these are rare examples. And being able to tell when it's time to move on is an extremely important skill for authors to have. Rule number 9, when you're stuck, make a list of what wouldn't happen next. Lots of times the materials to get you unstuck will show up. Writing the story of a series of manga or anime or a Pixar film could leave you up with a number of endless possibilities. It's hard to see what is a creative genius road to go on or an example of what would happen next. For example, look at Monsters, Inc. In this movie, Mike and Sully find Boo, and they have to try to get her back home before the other monsters discover that she's in their world. And this seems like a pretty simple narrative, but when you add point A to point B, this thing could spiral down out of control. So you gotta make a list of things that wouldn't happen first. Sully gives up and goes home. Sully curve stomps that lizard guy. Mike and Sully get betrayed and thrown into a snowy tundra where they hang out with a Yeti and eat snow cones. On the one hand, this helps clear a path for a story to move in a direction. On the other hand, the strange and somehow random ideas that you put onto paper could also give you inspiration. And in this case, they did go out and eat snow cones with a Yeti while being locked out. Series that are being published weekly or even monthly take a constant amount of effort and thought of the current situation, of the world that they're in and the direction that they are going. There really is no time to be stuck. You do have manga artists that like, hey, I'm reaching an ending, I gotta take a week's break right quick to figure out where I'm going with the story. But a majority of the time, you gotta be consistently on top of where you're going in that story. When you look through this rule with anime and manga, you see that there are a lot of series where they were stuck and they had to force their way out of it to meet deadlines or meet demand because they have to release that chapter this week and then they gotta release it next week. In Jujutsu Kaisen, before the final few chapters, there were very controversial statements from fans about the direction of the story and where they didn't like where it was going. Maybe they should have just sat down and said, hey, okay, in the final fight, Sakuna, he wouldn't grow helicopter arms and fly away, and then a dead character wouldn't show up and then help win the battle 4 chapters in with no explanation. And there wouldn't be a guy who would piss on the beloved character that we love so much and take over his body and brain and then use him like literally dancing on his corpse. That we wouldn't do that, right? Rule 10. Pull apart the stories you like. What you like from them is a part of you. You've got to recognize it before you could use it. As a creative, one of the most common pieces of information that you will receive is that you should make what you are interested in and passionate about. Because if you like it, then chances are that passion that you put into there, people are gonna like that too. It's why it's very important to take time to really explore and understand what you like. However, this could be a bit of a balancing act. The line between inspiration and mimicry is very thin, and if you borrow too much from a series, you could be seen as a ripoff. Sword Art Online was a massively successful show that really picked off the world of isekai and really helped anime get started in the 2010s. However, many series afterwards failed to actually innovate that idea and that original concept of Sword Art Online, and now they just get kind of compared to and written off as an SAO clone. But when done properly, you can offer exciting and beloved content. If you look at Pixar's Brave, someone said to themselves, hey, I really like Celtic folklore. Maybe we can make a film that explores that. And then boom, we have a top 15 Pixar revenue maker. In anime's case, you can look at Black Clover, a series where a magicless kid in the world of quite literally everybody has magic wants to become the Wizard King. Now, does this sound familiar? Where it should. This isn't exactly a rare concept either. Even just as the previous year to Black Clover release, we have My Hero Academia, which has a very similar premise. And at first, Black Clover definitely received criticism about being a ripoff to that kind of idea. However, ironically, what made this series special was its ability to borrow from other series and make those ideas fresh and that its own exciting ways. I mean, just about every other series that Black Clover was inspired by is some sort of tied to other series that Tabata was inspired by, Naruto, Bleach being the big ones. He took a serious look at everything that he enjoyed and included it into his own series without ripping it off. Sure, this is a line that isn't always walked perfectly, and sometimes he borrows too much. But overall, this is a great example of turning what you love into something of your own. Rule 11. Putting it on paper lets you start fixing it. If it stays in your head as a perfect idea, you'll never share it with anyone. Many great anime, manga, movies, books would have never seen the light of day if some guy just didn't write down what he was thinking at that coffee shop. We've talked about the importance of actually finishing a project rather than obsessing over it and becoming perfect, but equally important, it is especially prominent that you write down that actual idea. As they say, the first steps are normally the biggest one. For example, Pete Docter was inspired for the 2009 film Up while seeing an image of a house with balloons tied to the top of it. If he had forgotten to write down that idea along with the other ideas that he was inspired by, Up would have been completely forgotten about and never made. And it never would have made us cry in the first 5 minutes. It never would have made a lot of us cry it never would have made me cry in the first 5 minutes. As for anime, we can look at both One Punch Man and Mob Psycho, which were series all about getting those ideas simplified down and out. Each series began as a very simple, not that great drawing, simple webcomic, generally looking like somebody drew it on a napkin at a McDonald's. However, this allowed for the actual manga and anime to expand on this idea. But by setting a simple, easy foundation and putting it out there, these ideas were put into the world where they could have been expanded on and discovered. This is also a great representation of someone who doesn't really have a great artistic ability still being able to produce something great. Essentially, one is the idea man. And once those ideas are onto paper, you can improve on them. Rule 12. Discount the first thing that comes to your mind, then the second, third, fourth, fifth. Get the obvious out of the way and surprise yourself. Starting to create a story is a path that leads to infinite possibilities until you hone in on what you want. However, with the content being created more and more every day and the medium being quite literally oversaturated, the idea of becoming more creative and more surprising becomes much more valuable. As a result, getting rid of that first option and forcing yourself to be creative is a great way to both break predictable habits and to make more engaging and exciting content. Just like a faucet running dirty water, you have to keep that faucet running before the clean water can start flowing. Basically, get all your crap ideas out of the way. That way you can work on what you like and what's good and start cooking. In movies like Soul, for instance, you can feel that the writers use this practice. For those who haven't seen it, Soul is a movie about Joe Gardner trying to make it as a big-time musician. However, before he does, he unexpectedly dies and goes back and forth from the real world and purgatory to try and catch his big break. Yes, it's a Disney movie. Jesus Christ, Pixar really... Okay, this is already an interesting premise, but the story doesn't just go, Joe headed back to the earth. Instead, they go, what if they go back with this soul who is misguided also, as his body's stuck in a cat and the missing soul is stuck in his body who never got to experience life before. Because of these more unique decisions, I felt the story was always coming up with new and interesting ideas, steering the characters off and ultimately getting towards the end goal, resulting in something much more rewarding overall. On the anime side, you can look at One Piece. When beginning to write the series, the 7 warlords of the sea were meant to be the ultimate villains of the series. However, as the story continued to develop, the world grew and the ideas of the warlords evolved. Many of them remained villains, though others like Boa Hancock or Kuma, Jinbei, Mihawk, all of their roles were expanded on to create this more unique and interesting story. As for the villains, we are introduced to the Yonko, the Admirals, Emu, ultimately adding to the scale and weight of the story and powers in the world. Rule number 13, give your characters opinions. Passive, malleable might seem like likable things for you to write, but it's poison to the audience. Making a passive kind of character may seem nice, and if done well, it can result in a really lovable character. How far do you go with a character like this though, before you realize that this character is averse to conflict, and as a result, may miss out on a lot of important growth that is important in storytelling? People are all initially selfish, flawed, and difficult. We aren't meant to always go with the flow. And as a result, when a character is too passive or malleable, it can feel unrealistic or uninteresting. As an example, let's look at Woody again. Woody has one motivation: make Andy happy, be good for the toys. Basically, be a leader and take care of everyone and everything. And everything is great until he starts to realize that he's no longer Andy's favorite toy. And all the other characters, including Andy, look towards a new guidance and a new character for everything. The introduction of Buzz is right where Woody's real personality starts to be revealed. The flawed and jealous and angry. For the rest of the movie, Woody is always challenging Buzz and consistently trying to take the wind out of his sails because he is desperate for trying to stay relevant. But imagine if Buzz showed up and Woody was just like, "Saw, dude," and then the credits rolled and he was just cool with it. There's no challenge or interest. There's no conflict or questioning morals. Woody needs to not be a passive and malleable character in order for this story to exist. And for me, no better anime character fits this perfectly than Death Note's Light Yagami. This is the example of the characters who are active and rigid. His personality breeds conflict. He genuinely believes himself to be a god. And because of that, anyone who opposes him and his view of the world is immediately an enemy. Not only that, but the black and white view of the world leads to him making choices which are extremely controversial to the viewer, but which seem completely obvious to Light himself. By giving Light a sense of conviction to this insane view of the world, the mangaka had something solid that he was able to build upon this entire world. And as long as Light is unchained and unhinged and rigid, then anyone who comes into contact with him would create some sort of conflict. This is magnified when we're introduced to L, a character who is just as stubborn, who believes in themselves to be just as right as deeply as Light. Suddenly, we have an unstoppable force clashing with an immovable object, and that's what makes Death Note so appealing. I had to stop recording to do something, and then it was 3 weeks later, so let's keep going. Rule number 14. Rule 14. Why must you tell this story? What is the burning belief within you that your story feeds off of? That's the heart of it. This is more of a reminder that ties into what we've already been over in Rule 3. It is vital to your story that theme and meaning stay intact. You are making a story for a reason. What is it that you want to tell your audience? For example, if your story is about family, then it's important to remind yourself of that, and that way that message stays present. If you go too long without connecting yourself to that beginning idea, then everything will slowly start to fall apart. I look at movies that we have already talked about before, movies like Up. A story that tells viewers about how the real adventures in our life come from our relationships that we make. And this is something that is apparent through all movies. When Carl meets his wife, his life is full of little moments which make every day more exciting and wonderful. And well, then, until... Hold it together. Hold it together. It's okay. After she passes away, he begins to shut down. And by disconnecting from the rest of the world, his life becomes monotone and boring. It isn't until he meets Russell where he opens up and starts to feel his sense of adventure again. It's a core part in both the story and the characters. On the anime side of things, we look at movies like A Silent Voice, which is a very clear message that you could tell was extremely important for the mangaka to get across. Now, if I was to summarize the point of it, don't be a dick. Now, Silent Voice is known for it being a manga, but more importantly, it's mostly known for being a movie. And now, normally when making a movie out of a manga, it can feel like vital things are left out. It can feel rushed. However, because A Silent Voice has such a direct message, it translated to a shorter medium fluidly. The story following Shoya, an elementary school student who is, may I say, kind of an asshole. And the story stays like this until it escalates with the introduction of Shoko, a new student who is deaf. Shoya bullies her, berates her. Now this is all fine and dandy for his perspective because everybody's backing him up through it. But once he gets in trouble for going too far, everyone starts to distance themselves and put some blame on him because nobody wants to be associated with the guy who bullied a deaf girl, even though they were the ones that were also doing it. Years later, Shoya comes across Shoko once again, and he is completely guilt-stricken over what a little monster he was as a child. Ultimately, he spends a lot of time and effort trying to fix the damage that he has done, not knowing if it's because it's the right thing to do or because it's just what he needs to do to feel better about himself. If the mangaka Yoshitoki was to ask herself halfway through making this idea why this has to be made, she could have pointed out dozens of things: representation by deaf people in Japan, the idea of redemption and selfishness that comes along with it, or generally trying to teach people not to be dicks. More importantly, this message never comes across as preachy. Because Yoshitoki so clearly put much effort into the message of the story, the experience becomes something incredible and impactful, powerful. Rule 15. If you were your character in this situation, how would you feel? Honesty lends credibility to unbelievable situations. Now, this rule can be put into a couple of different directions. One, you have a lot of writers and fans seeing themselves in certain characters. They put themselves into that character. Be that because the character and them share morals, they admire the traits about that character, or they're just cool as hell. However, it is more important to put yourself from your own perspective into that character's shoes rather than simply wanting to become that character. There are plenty of anime characters to look at, but first, let's take a look at The Incredibles with Mr. Incredible. Bob was forced to stop working as a hero. He had to be put in witness protection multiple times, and as a result, he begins living a life less extraordinary than what he's used to living. He went from saving hundreds every week to having to work a boring 9-to-5 job where he is forced to kind of screw people over because of the absolute law that there is no being a superhero. Mr. Incredible decided to go back to being a hero at night, sneaking around being kind of a vigilante, trying not to get caught, because if he's caught, he has to relocate again and move his family and 3 kids, mind you, to somewhere different. This not only puts himself and his family into risk of being discovered, it puts a big hardship onto the family and his wife. Right or wrong, it doesn't matter, because that's not what's in question here. He makes these choices to keep being a hero to save people, whether it be for a selfish reason like trying to relive the glory days, or because he never agreed with the laws in the first place that put him and his family and friends into hiding, or just honestly, he thinks it's something that he has to do. Regardless of the reason, it makes us question what we would do in those shoes. And personally, as someone with 2 kids of his own, I can totally sympathize with having to balance providing with your family and for your family with doing the things that I want to do that still make me me. It's completely opinion-based to think that he's doing the right thing or the wrong thing. It's more important to try to put ourselves in his shoes and try to figure out why they're doing that and what would we do in that situation. Honestly, this is something that anime does all the time. But my favorite example is with Trigun and Vash the Stampede. This character who has a massive bounty and a massive amount of guilt that he carries. And as a result of this, he promises and vows to never kill again, which is a pretty big deal when you are considered the humanoid typhoon, the walking disaster that can ruin and wipe out a town just by walking up. In a show that's based in the Wild West with big guns, bigger bad guys, and even bigger light bulbs, it is just that much harder to keep your promise. After all, it is a kill or be killed world, and he is choosing to take a pacifist route. Not only does this give us numerous fun moments with creative solutions to his problems, but every time he is put in a life or death situation, it makes us question how he's gonna possibly stick to his guns, so to speak, and not kill. The easier solution in most of these scenarios would definitely be for Vash to just kill his enemy. But by putting ourselves in Vash's shoes, we are truly understanding to what that promise meant to him. He is able to live by this impossible code for most of the series. And because of that, he does break that rule. It is easy for an audience to empathize with how difficult that decision is and how meaningful a change it could be for Vash's character. Number 16, what are the stakes? Give us a good reason to root for the character. What happens if they don't succeed? Stack the odds against. Understanding the stakes of a situation allows for moments to carry the appropriate sense of weight and presence. If the fate of the world is at stake, then it makes sense for a battle to the death to take hand. But if we're just fighting over common ice cream, then the conflict needs to come down to that level. However, there's more to it. We have talked a few times already about how important effort is. And here is no different. If we are trying to save the world, there needs to be a difficult parallel to that. You can't have the Joker about to blow up Gotham and Batman be like, hey, found that button that turns off the bombs conveniently. I didn't even really have to look for it. It was just right there. That just takes away from the weight of that moment, from the stakes at hand. Pixar's Coco follows a boy's journey into the afterlife to find his great-great-grandfather. So the conflict that Pixar decided on was to make it so that the journeying to the underworld, Miguel would risk never being able to leave or becoming trapped in the land of the dead. Essentially, he is risking his own life to find someone who has already died. The risk and the reward are perfectly balanced. Meanwhile, you have shows like Steins Gate, a series where Okabe and his friends fuck up a timeline so bad that they have no idea how to even get back to where they started at and undo the threads of time they tangled together, or in layman's terms, fucked up. In the new timelines, we learned that one of the characters is a fixed staple point, destined to die. By manipulating timelines, trying to make things better, Okabe risks losing everything and everyone that he's cared about, and every attempt made to fix the timeline only risks changing things to make it worse, essentially creating ever-increasing stakes while Okabe continues to become more desperate with each try. Rule 17. No work is ever wasted. If it's not working, let's go and move on. It'll come back around when it's more useful later. If you have an idea that doesn't fit the present story or project, the idea is still something you can draw from in the future. You can see this in essentially all of Pixar's sequel projects. Like Toy Story 3, you have a bear that was originally supposed to be in the first film. Due to him not fitting into the story, he was, like an unwanted toy, put on the shelf and for the third movie needed for the villain and plot. One writer who always reuses ideas that doesn't seem to quite come into play at first, but finds their place 1,000 chapters later, is Oda. I don't think that Oda plans all of his plot twists. I don't think he's a god writer. But what I do believe that Oda is good at, and his strong point is leaving doors open that allows him to bring characters and moments back into relevancy. I could use dozens of examples of this happening, but one of my favorite moments is with Wapol. Wapol, for those of you who don't remember this One Piece villain, is a villain very early on in the series when we meet Chopper, who is famous for being god-awful. He had no redeeming qualities, no charisma, no real story to get people hooked on him. He was just a shitty guy for the purpose of being a shitty guy. And while this allows characters like Chopper, Kureha, Hiruluk, and Dalton to shine, it's left him as some sort of weird relic that no one likes to think about or remember. However, years later, Oda returned him to the cover of the story. And we found out after being kicked off his island, he created a new super metal, became king again, and married a supermodel. That is a lot of things to do off screen, even in One Piece. Still not exactly likable or relevant. Yeah, it's a fun fact that the metal that Frankie used to remodel himself is Wapol metal. But from there, what? Jump forward a few hundred chapters, because Wapol is a king now again, he goes to Revelry. This hateable, cowardly, selfish bastard learns the truth behind the world government, the big secret and one of the biggest plot twists in One Piece. And as he rushes to run away and hide, he accidentally picks up Princess Vivi, a fan favorite important character, before making their escape together. Suddenly, he is tied to a character we all love, and he is the one person in the world who knows about Emu and Gorosei killing Cobra. This worthless character was completely reestablished to find himself in the crux of everything happening behind the scenes of the story. And by giving him a sense of importance and weight, he became someone we are actually looking forward to see again, opposed to someone that we just forgot about. Rule 18. You have to know yourself, the difference between doing your best and fussing. Story is testing, not refining. We've talked about before the importance of not letting yourself become obsessed with perfection. However, it's important to also not be complacent in your writing. It is easy to fall into habits, use traditional or practice skeletons for your story, or just generally go with the flow and whatever comes easy. But challenging yourself is just as important as challenging your characters. Just like we want them to grow up, we also need to grow up as well. For us, an interesting choice of the creators of Up made was to make the opening sequence completely done without any words. Not only does this challenge the audience to follow along with what is shown, it is also a challenge for the writers as well. Telling is easy, showing is much harder. But by making these decisions and challenging themselves, Pixar created one of the most well-crafted scenes and most famous of any of their movies. Similarly, we have That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. In this series, the protagonist is essentially an all-powerful god that can just do whatever the hell he wants. However, when it comes time to expanding his town and growing, he will regularly make the choice to have his citizens put actual effort in developing things for themselves, rather than solving all the things and problems for them, although he is highly capable of it. Sure, if a demon attacks, he'll square up with them, but when it comes to the day by day, he lets people handle themselves. When you have a character who is dramatically overpowered like this, it is easy to lean on them as a crutch to solve every problem. We see this in a lot of isekais. But in Slime, the easy answer tends to be the last resort. And that definitely helps the series feel unique and special amongst this horde of OP protagonists. Rule 19. Coincidences to get your character into trouble are great. Coincidences to get them out of it are cheating. This quote highlights the difference between engaging storytelling and lazy resolutions. Coincidences that get characters into trouble are compelling because they introduce unexpected conflict and challenge the characters, forcing them to adapt and grow. These kind of coincidences feel natural and align with these rules of the story. For example, if a character accidentally overhears a critical secret or is the wrong place, wrong time, it sets off a chain of events that drive the narrative forward. Such coincidences create tension and excitement, making the audience eager to see how the characters will navigate through these new obstacles. On the other hand, coincidences that get characters out of trouble often feel like a betrayal of the audience and their investment into the story. When a sudden lucky or implausible twist resolves the conflict without effort or consequence, it undermines the stakes and the character's agency. This kind of resolution can feel contrived, robbing the narrative of emotional weight. For example, if a character is trapped in an impossible situation and is rescued by a random stranger who happens to pass by, it feels unsatisfying because the resolution wasn't earned. Ultimately, coincidences should complicate the story and not be used to resolve it, allowing the characters to grow through their actions instead of relying on luck. This approach keeps the story engaging and feel deserved. If we look at the movie Cars, Lightning loses a big race at the start of the story when his tire explodes, something that could have happened to any car on the track, but sends him down a path of self-discovery and growth as he learns there is more than just winning. But think about if the reverse happened. Imagine a big race where a hero and an antagonist are neck and neck, and then bam, the bad guy's wheel pops and the good guy wins. This just feels lame, boring, and completely undeserved. When it's done wrong, you'll hear it called something like plot armor, where the author will write themselves into a corner and allow the characters to escape with the power of coincidence or a brand new element to the story that hasn't been explored before. While many anime do this really well, I think we could use as an example one that does this very wrong, and that's with Naruto. So let's set the stage. We are in the middle of the Great Ninja War, basically World War III, if the soldiers were super athletic wizards. And the guy leading the enemy forces was Madara. Madara is the strongest ninja. He is the smartest ninja. He can't be injured. He can use limbo to basically become untouchable. He has magic eyes that let him copy, negate, and see through any attack. Basically, he is an unstoppable force. There's even a scene before this where 5 of the strongest ninjas in the world, the Kage, all group up to fight him at once. So the dude's like, well, since you seem to think a numbers advantage is fair game, I'll show you a numbers advantage, and then makes 25 clones of himself, meaning now it's a fair fight. Instead of being 1-5, it is 5-1. Meanwhile, he is just sitting back, relaxing, enjoying himself, asking himself if he should let his clones do Susanoo or not. Which, if you're not a giant Naruto nerd, basically is an insanely strong ghost armor. It is all set in stone that nothing in the world can stop him. But then some guy named Zetsu pops up and says, actually, I've been playing you this whole time, and literally stabs him in the back, and that's it. And like, Zetsu isn't even that strong or anything. It'd be like if Thanos finished wiping the floor of the Avengers and then Agent Coulson just shoots him in the back out of nowhere. Resolutions need logical build-up to feel good. And if you let coincidences solve your problems, then everything else will fall apart. Rule 20. Take the building blocks of a movie you dislike. How do you rearrange them into what you do like? This is more of like an exercise than a rule, but it is still very important. Rearranging the building blocks of a failed story into something better involves recognizing what didn't work, identifying the core strengths and the original concept which could have worked but fell through. This process was seen in Cars 3, where they saw the mistakes of Cars 2, as well as Konosuba, which redefined one of the isekai genres by learning from the series that came before it. Cars 2 is often criticized as the filler movie, or just bad. Instead of focusing on Lightning McQueen, it focuses on Mater. It becomes a really dumb spy movie that completely lacks the heartwarming elements of the first movie. Don't quote me on this, but I don't think there was even Rascal Flatts. Recognizing this misstep, Cars 3 returns to the emotional core of the series. It wasn't just about red car that looks cool, it was about Lightning's journey to self-discovery and growth. It reframed the franchise by addressing aging, mentorship, legacy, themes that felt more authentic and emotional. The story used McQueen's struggles against the new generation of racers as a way to explore his vulnerability, ultimately transforming him into a mentor figure. By building on the emotional stakes and stripping away of the goofy plot of Cars 2, Cars 3 reestablished the franchise's core identity while still allowing it to grow. Meanwhile, anime like Konosuba takes a similar approach to reworking the isekai genre. Before Konosuba, isekai was getting filled with stories that often revolved around an overpowered protagonist, idealized worlds, and a straightforward powered fantasy. While these elements are fun, they were also formulaic and predictable. Konosuba took these building blocks and rearranged them into a parody that lovingly deconstructs the genre's tropes. Instead of an all-powerful protagonist, Kazuma is hilariously underwhelming, and his party members are more than likely liabilities than assets. The world he's transported in is filled with such absurdity and chaos rather than being a cookie cutter of other isekai worlds. By leading into comedy and subverting expectations, Konosuba completely redefines the isekai genre while still paying homage to its roots. Rule 21. You gotta identify with your situation and characters. You can't just write quote-unquote cool. What would make you act that way? This rule is pretty similar to Rule 15. It's all about identifying with the story and its characters. But more so, this reminds us to keep the characters grounded instead of just putting ourselves in their shoes. There is so much temptation when it comes to making your characters cool, but you need to keep them believable and logical. Sometimes they're going to make mistakes, slip up, or just generally do things in a less cool way. But that is being human, being flawed. No one person is perfect all the time. No one is a badass all the time. But more important, keeping characters' motivations genuine. The line, "what would make you act that way," is vital here. This isn't just putting yourself in the character's shoes to understand how they feel. You need to understand why they're doing what they're doing. I want to take a look at Turning Red for this. A movie about a young girl being turned into a giant red panda and is embarrassing of her body changing. This is not so subtly based on the scary and embarrassing changes that young girls feel when they start their periods. And the entire movie stems from May trying to balance becoming her own person while trying to live up to her family's ideals of being the perfect little girl, all while dealing with the frustrations and the emotions involved with her body going through, turning into a giant red panda. Despite the supernatural element, this is something that every woman in the writer's room could understand. And because of that, it made the entire movie feel grounded and real. On the anime side, we have Fairy Tail. There is a lot to get in this series, but the thing I want to focus on is the idea of missing parents.
What? Parents?
Natsu, like all the other dragon slayers, all had their dragons completely vanish out of thin air. Lucy's mom died and doesn't really talk about her dad. Then he dies too. Lox's father abused him, and then he was exiled by his grandfather. Gray lost his parents too, and then was adopted by Or, and then Or dies trying to desperately save him. Urza's mom abandoned her, and almost every character has lost their parents and is trying to find them and or find closure. And the reason why so many of these stories about parents resonate really strongly in this manga is because of the writer Hiromashima, who also lost his father growing up. He is telling a story that he understands, and because of that, everything built around these characters losing parents feels not only real, but tangible. Rule 22. What is the essence of your story? Most economical telling of it. If you know that, you can build out from there. This question, albeit from the last one, is very straightforward and very simple. Asking what is the focus of your story, you'd be surprised about how many movies that seem complicated are actually fairly simple. For example, the entirety of the movie Inception, which is supposed to be a complicated mind twist of a movie, can be fit onto one page. Harry Potter's longest book is only 4 subplots. And when you look at Pixar movies like Wreck-It Ralph, you could simplify the whole movie in just one sentence. A video game villain wants to be a hero. Everything else is just the idea around the fluff and circumstance. But the essence of the story is simple and straightforward. And when we look at anime, it's no different. One of the most successful series of the recent years is easily Demon Slayer. But despite its success, it is a very simple premise. A boy's sister becomes a demon and he wants to try to join the demon corps so he can learn how to fix her. Look at Haikyuu. A short dude wants to play volleyball and joins the school team, trying to overcome his body's shortcomings, no pun intended, with his raw and unfiltered talent for just grinding through it. Once you have a simple idea set as a foundation, you can build off of that in a much more stable way. Anime is all about having a simple premise and then blowing it up to give you an amazing adventure after. Komi-san wants to make 100 friends, Luffy wants to be king of the pirates, and Saitama just needs one punch, man. And that is 22 rules that Pixar uses that can also be correlated with helping you understand anime. And so Pixar understands anime, at least in my opinion. But what do you think? And just a reminder that all 22 of these rules are ultimately guidelines than rules. But regardless, it is clear that if you're watching Western or Eastern animation, you can find a lot of the same principles. And as it turns out, for as different as anime and Pixar movies might be, they also have a lot in common. So maybe I was too hard on you, Dad. Maybe I was a little too hard on you. I mean, but for real, it's not anime. It's not, like, you understand that, right? Like, it's not an anime, okay? So like animation from Japan, it has a lot of cool fight scenes, okay? You can't compare it to something like Winnie the Pooh or Monsters Inc., okay? You just can't do that, okay? If you think that that's what I'm doing, that is completely embarrassing to me. I mean, I watch some embarrassing things, but I need you to be embarrassed about ashamed of me for the right reasons, not because I just watch anime, okay? Anime is not me sitting around watching Powerpuff Girls. It's me sitting around watching really cool things that you might not find as equally cool. But once you fully understand what that is, essentially, it's a lot more to be embarrassed about, really, actually. You know what? Probably just continue thinking that I'm doing other things than that. Yeah, I don't want to explain what Nagatoro is to you. I don't want to explain Yosuga no Sora and why I'm watching it at 1 in the morning. Yeah, you know what? Actually, just go ahead and